RAF Station Bassingbourne, Cambridgeshire. My pilot, Air Vice Marshal Wickham, with whom, in war, I flew over the battlefields of Europe.
You know, it's all of 15 years since I last flew with you, and in a very different sort of aeroplane.
Well, I think you'll find this one's a good deal more comfortable than the last was. But, I hope I remember how to fly it.
So do I.
Now, look. I do a sort of back jackknife in. Watch me closely. And swing the feet up. There I am.
That's the nearest thing to impossibility for me. Oh, we'll see. Oh, I've done it.
Winter 1-1, taxi.
Winter 1-1, 071023.
Winter 1-1, takeoff.
Winter 1-1, clear takeoff, call turning.
As we swung eastward towards Germany, my thoughts went back to that night in March 1945, when, crouched in the fuselage of a Lancaster with a microphone in my hand, I looked down on our target, the city of Cologne. Tonight we're attacking not only the city, but the retreating German army, streaming back into Cologne from the west and hoping to cross the Rhine. I'm flying with the Pathfinders, who marked the exact aiming point with colored flares. The bombers of the main force are now streaming in above and below us. As we drive steadily over Cologne in a dead level straight line, the German flak is winking and flashing. We're circling round now, watching the inferno below us, and silhouetted against it, the Lancasters and the Halifaxes making off in the all-revealing light of the moon. Today, after last night's attack, the city is a shambles. There's acre upon acre of devastation. Whole blocks have vanished, whole suburbs tumbled to the ground. When the war had ended, thousands of Cologne's faithful citizens trudged back to their ruined city.
I came back to Cologne in the autumn of 1945. When I was dismissed as a prisoner of war, I found the town completely flat. I walked from the station through the town to one of the suburbs, and I couldn't find a quarter or street which was intact. And I felt very sad. I couldn't understand that this old Cologne had gone.
The cathedral was almost the only surviving feature. The new Cologne stands proudly on its curve of the river, rebuilt by Dr. Max Adenauer, the son of Germany's... Dr. Adenauer, at the end of the war, just how badly was Cologne damaged?
About 78% of Cologne has been damaged and destroyed.
When you began the main job of rebuilding the city, what line were you following? Was it to preserve the traditional Cologne, or was it to make something new?
First came to rebuild the damaged houses so that everyone has his dwellings. And then it was absolutely necessary to clear the streets from the rubble. Everyone was supposed to help to clear the streets, and so I did it. And everyone was drafted to help on one day in the year. It took about 3 years to clear the streets.
When you began the main job of rebuilding, what line were you taking? Did you intend to preserve the traditional city or to make something new?
No, we tried to keep the old atmosphere of Cologne. You know, Cologne has had many old churches. We rebuilt the old churches in the old styles, but those districts in Cologne that have been destroyed entirely have been rebuilt in a modern style. So we have a combination between old and new, and I think that will be the new Cologne atmosphere.
This is the new Cologne that they've built out of the shambles. In the bustle of this modern city, I found the ruins of a church, and below its broken roof, two simple figures, a weeping mother and father, mourning the loss of countless thousands killed in Cologne during the war. Cologne, of course, had to be one of our major targets in the West for bombing. Just as we knew that the Next major obstacle in front of us in our journey towards the east was this river, the Rhine. Crossing the Rhine was going to be a major operation, but we knew that once we were across, we would have fought our last great battle in the west. Under cover of an immense smokescreen, Montgomery prepared his armies for the next attack. The materials of war needed to cross the river moved steadily towards the front line. By March the 23rd, the British and American supply troops and engineers had transferred more than 250,000 tons of ammunition and stores and bridging equipment to the dumps on the west bank of the Rhine. The full-scale invasion of Germany from the west was about to begin. That night and the following morning, British, Canadian and American troops began the largest and the most difficult amphibious operation since the landings on the Normandy coast. With them went a fellow correspondent, Winford von Thomas.
We're in. 3 minutes to go, and we are racing across, racing for that hell on the other side. Now we're utterly alone, it seems, right out in the midst of this swirling stream, waiting all the time for the enemy to open up. And you get a feeling of irresistible power flooding now across the Rhine. But all the time that bank, which we've been thinking about so much during the last 2 weeks, is coming nearer and nearer.
They were across, untouched. They were on the German side of the river at last. In the morning, went an airborne army to lend a hand.
It was a heartening sight to us on the ground after the strain of our crossing over the Rhine to look up and see coming overhead the first aircraft bringing the men of the airborne formations. Those aircraft flew low, in perfect formation. There seemed hundreds and hundreds of them coming in from the west in endless streams. The roar of their engines drowned out the sound of the barrage thudding away below them.
I flew with the airborne troops in one of the aircraft towing the gliders. We had taken off earlier that morning from an airfield in Suffolk. Behind me, in the glider, sat my colleague Stanley Maxted, and together we recorded the final stages of that historic battle.
Stanley Maxted in the glider here. Well, it won't be long now. The men have taken a last business-like look at their automatic rifles. It must soon be time to cast off.
The Rhine lies left and right across our path below us, shining in the sunlight, wide and with sweeping curves. And the whole of this mighty airborne army is now crossing and filling the whole sky. On our right-hand side, a Dakota has just gone down in flames.
Remember, these men were the first to land on D-Day. Remember? So, Richard Dimbleby, tell them when you get back about these guys and how they went into battle again. Tell Britain, Richard. Tell the world. There's not much time now, so happy laugh.
Our glider's gone. We better go. There she goes down behind us. We turn hard away in a tight circle to port to get out of this area. I'm sorry if I'm shouting. This is a very tremendous sight.
There was a firm link-up between the airborne and the ground troops on the first day. The last barrier was down. We were well established across the river which the Germans had sworn to defend, whatever the cost. 48 hours after the crossing, our engineers had built 8 bridges. Every conceivable kind of supply needed to deal the final blow to the enemy flooded across the Rhine. In a week, we'd swept forward 65 miles in what must have been the fastest advance of the war. We plunged deeper and deeper into the heart of Germany. As the Allied procession moved onward, prison camps were broken open. Among the first to be liberated was a BBC war correspondent captured in North Africa, Edward Ward.
The greatest moment of my life, without a doubt, was when I saw the tanks come bursting out of a wood 200 yards from me at 5:30 on Wednesday afternoon. They forced their way through a cheering crowd of POWs and foreign workers. Everyone became delirious with excitement. Everything has moved so quickly after those years of stagnation that it still all seems something of a dream. I still feel rather like Rip Van Winkle returning to a strange world. To us, it meant the end of a long, weary term of imprisonment, dating back to Dunkirk days for some.
In the race across Germany, our columns used every available road and lane. In the opposite direction came the remnants of the German army. The battle had swept past them quickly and painlessly. For others, the peace had come too late.
I find it hard to describe adequately the horrible things that I've seen and heard. But here, unadorned, are the facts. There are 40,000 men, women, and children in the camp. Of this total of 40,000, 4,250 are acutely ill or dying of virulent disease. In the last few months alone, 30,000 prisoners have been killed off or allowed to die. I wish with all my heart that everyone fighting in this war, and above all those whose duty it is to direct the war from Britain and America, could have come with me through the barbed wire fence that leads to the inner compound of the camp.
Whenever I come back here to the site of the Belsen concentration camp, I always feel that there's death in the air. It's a place which is surrounded by trees, and yet you hardly ever hear a bird singing. It is, in fact, now a memorial maintained by the German government. And they ask all the people who come in here to come in reverence and as though in mourning for those who died. Over here, in the middle of what was the camp, the Jews have their own memorial. And that commemorates 30,000 Jews who were exterminated here. And it demands that the world shall remember. There are many people nowadays who want everyone to forget. But if you were here, as I was, on the day when this camp was first discovered and opened 14 years ago, you never can forget. This year, for the first time, German school children are being taught about that period of horror into which Germany sank under the Nazi regime. For the older people who lived in the village near to the camp, there can be no escape from memory. The people of the village of Bergen, next door to the Belsen camp, are coming out of church. 14 years ago, we came into this village and we asked the people here to tell us what they knew about the Belsen camp. Nobody would say anything. A few days ago, through an announcement in the local newspaper, we asked English-speaking residents of the village, and there are some, if they would come forward now to tell us of their memories of it. No one has come forward. I don't think they ever will. Now, 12 miles up the road from here is the town of Soltau, and it was there, one evening in 1945, that I heard a most dramatic broadcast by Lord Haw from Hamburg, 40 miles further north. Haw knew that the war was ending, and he was drunk.
This evening, I am talking to you about Germany. Let me tell you that in Germany, there still remains the spirit of unity and the spirit of strength. Let me tell you that here we have a united people who are modest in their wishes. They are not imperialists. They don't want to take what doesn't belong to them. All they want is to live their own simple lives, undisturbed by outside influences.
In that last unhappy performance, I heard the downfall of Germany. 3 weeks later, William Joyce was shot in the thigh trying to escape. His wife stood by as he was taken on the last journey to London, there to stand his trial for treason at the Old Bailey, to hear the sentence of death, and to be hanged at Wandsworth in 1946. Today, the city of Hamburg lies solid and spacious and wealthy on the beautiful Alster Lake. There's a popular trip round the lake by motorboat, with a guide to point out the skyline and the expensive private houses on the banks. As I looked at this new and busy city, I remembered a Hamburg which only 15 years ago lay half in ruins. And I wondered if the scars of war had really been covered over, and if, to the young people who live here, war was no more than a passage of recent history. Outside a Hamburg youth hostel, I met a young university student, Eckhard Meyer.
Eckhart, when you were a boy at school just at the end of the war, what did your teachers tell you about Hitler and the Hitler period?
Well, when I went to school, war had just ended, and it was a bit difficult to teach things about the war, see? And they didn't tell us a lot about them. And later on, we had to try to read, to get knowledge out of books.
What about the future of Germany? Do you think there's any chance of a dictatorship like Hitler's ever coming back to this country again?
Well, I think there's no chance for a Hitler to come back to Germany again. We have learned a lot in those times of the war, and we've heard such cruel things about things happening in the concentration camps that I'm sure nobody really wants to have a dictator again in this country.
Under the youth hostel at the bottom of the hill, I found an air raid shelter, sealed off by a pair of rusting gates. Just across the road is another shelter, a huge concrete citadel. It stands on the edge of a fairground which bursts into life every night. Beyond the fair, the famous and glittering Reeperbahn, a long street of neon lights, and in it over 100 nightclubs and dance halls and cafes, which between them offer sideshows and beer and music until the dawn.
Well, that's Hamburg, a city rebuilt in 13 years from a mass of rubble. And today, an industrious, very hard-working, rich, and rather cynical city. The Hamburg, in fact, that it was before the war. And I come now to the next and the last stage of my journey to Berlin. In January 1943, I flew to Berlin in a Lancaster of Bomber Command on the first mass raid. Flying to Berlin today is a very much easier and a very much safer proposition. You're given an air corridor, which is about 20 miles wide, and you have to fly between roughly 3,500 and 9,500 feet. If you keep within that corridor, you should be perfectly all right. If you stray outside, there's a chance that you may be invited to land on the wrong side of the Iron Curtain. That wouldn't suit me at all, so we'll hope that nothing like that happens today.
16 years ago, I remember climbing into a camouflage bomber on a cheerless winter night. It was just another routine job. I remember we had a cargo of bombs for Berlin, and we'd be back next morning if all went well. I remember the crew of 6 cool and skillful men who night after night took the war right into the heart of Germany. And I remember the dispatch that I recorded afterwards.
The Berlin raid was a big show, as heavy bomber operations go. And the wing commander who took me stayed over Berlin for half an hour. The flak was hot, but it has been hotter. For me, it was a pretty hair-raising experience. We knew well enough when we were approaching Berlin. There was a complete ring of powerful searchlights waving and crossing, but we flew on, and just then, another Lancaster dropped a load of incendiaries. And where, a moment before, there had been a dark patch of the city, a dazzling silver pattern spread itself. We flew over the city 3 times, for more than half an hour. while the guns sought us out and failed to hit us. At last, our bomb aimer sighted his objective below, and for one unpleasant minute we flew steady and straight. Then he pressed the button, and the biggest bomb of the evening, our 3.5-tonner, fell away and down. It was engrossing to realize that the Nazi leaders and their ministries were only a few thousand feet from us, and that this shimmering mass of flares and bombs and gun flashes was their stronghold.
In Berlin, 2.5 years later, and 2 months after the official end of the war in Europe, I recorded the triumphant climax to a long and bitter journey.
It's just after 5 o'clock in the afternoon on the 4th of July, and the first elements of the British force that are going to occupy one area of Berlin are driving into the outskirts of the city. I'm talking to you from a street in the industrial suburb of Spandau, a heap of ruins in every direction. But nevertheless, a crowd of Berlin citizens has gathered to see go by the British force as it comes in after its long journey by road from the British zone of Germany. And the crowd watching, not cheering or clapping as you would hardly expect them to do, but just watching with great interest as this long column that's come so far, but is still spick and span and freshly painted, goes winding its way into Berlin to take up its positions in the zone of occupation.
The British came in through Spandau, and ever since then, this suburb of Berlin has been the home of quite a part of the British garrison. But nowadays, a lot more people come to Spandau, Germans in particular, and they come to gape at this Spandau jail here. And here, inside these red brick walls, Hitler's deputy, Rudolf Hess, has been a prisoner for many years. Now, Spandau's changed a good deal. You're going to find the main city's changed a good deal more. So with Spandau as our starting point, I want you to come with me now on a quick tour of West Berlin to see what's happened in the past few years. Despite the severe damage suffered during the war, despite the blockade of 1948, and despite its political isolation, Berlin remains a city of world standing. Today it has an air of freshness and vitality and prosperity, and it's rapidly becoming the most modern city in Western Europe. 200 of the 250 buildings in the Kurfürstendamm were destroyed by war. Now it's a boulevard of restaurants and theaters and nightclubs and exclusive shops. But not all West Berlin has been rebuilt. Parts of it are just as I saw them 15 years ago.
It's not a very pleasant experience to drive about Berlin. This is not the capital of before the war. That impression of solidity and a certain grandeur that atoned for the ugliness of much of the place have gone, blown away by thousands of tons of bombs and bitter street fighting. I have never seen widespread ruin to equal that of the center of Berlin. Whole buildings, complete German ministries have dissolved into dust.
Today, many of the German wartime ministries still lie in shapeless ruins behind the Brandenburg Gate, on the border between the British and Soviet zones of Berlin. I wondered how it felt to live in a divided city more than 100 miles behind the Iron Curtain. Just inside the western sector, near the Reichstag, I met the editor of a Berlin newspaper, Dr. Rice. We've been looking at the face, as we call it, of the new Berlin. I wonder whether, as a man who's lived here for a long time, you could tell me roughly how much of this city has already been rebuilt.
Well, I could give you just an approximate figure, and this will be about 70% of Western Berlin, which have been rebuilt now, and about a quarter or 30% still has to be done.
What do the citizens of West Berlin feel about being cut off from the West? Do they feel they're living on a desert island?
When you live in Berlin, the whole week you don't feel that you live on an island. On weekends, when normally you would drive out of the city, then you feel it, that there's a frontier and that you cannot move out so easily.
Supposing by some unexpected event the city were to be united again and become just one city, do you think that the citizens of West Berlin would be able to look on the citizens of East Berlin as just people who lived 4 streets away, or would they regard them as foreigners?
Oh, I think this will not be a problem. The population of Berlin still feels like one unity. There are so many personal and family relations. I have been living in Eastern Berlin before the war, then my house was bombed out and we moved to Western Berlin, and now when we have a family party in our home, we have more guests from the eastern sector than from the western part of it, and it's quite normal for us.
Now, you've lived here a long time, and you were here during the last days of Berlin when the Russians were destroying the city by fighting through it. Did you see or hear much of that?
Well, I heard more than I saw, because for political reasons, in the last month I lived in a cellar, and so I didn't see too much, but I heard more, and this was quite a bit.
Of course, you weren't the only person living in a cellar. Hitler was living in a cellar too.
Well, but if you allow me to say, for different reasons.
In the Reich Chancellery, where Hitler spent his last days, I ended my career as a war correspondent with this last dispatch. Outside Hitler's bunker are 5 petrol cans used for burning his body, and with them the tattered remains of clothing. The whole of this Reich Chancellery has fallen to pieces, and with it have gone the last vestiges of Nazi power. In the center of Hitler's study stands his chair, in a confusion of smashed woodwork, of filth and rubble. Well, that's where I sat in 1945, in Hitler's chair in his study in the Chancellery. And I suppose I couldn't have gone very much further. Now, I would like today to have taken you back to the same place to finish my journey just as I did the original. But alas, today, with the film cameras, we can go no further. We can't get permission to film inside communist Berlin. So what I have done is to bring you to the nearest possible point, to the extremity of the West. And if you like to look just behind me here, look across the open space which is the Iron Curtain. You can see on the other side the remains of Nazi Germany as they are today. The Russians have razed the Chancellery to the ground. Where it stood is a wasteland of grass and bushes. But there, in the background, are 2 heaps of broken concrete, one that looks like a huge mushroom. And they are the remains of the entrance to the underground bunker where Hitler himself died. Now, this is the last of the programs in which 6 men have returned to Europe to repeat their wartime travels. 5 of them ended their journeys just as they had done before. I only wish that I could have ended mine.